Welcome back, folks. Today, we're going to be talking about perhaps one of the most disturbing things that I've seen come up on my timeline in the last few weeks and months. It's this image right here that shows an IDF soldier sledgehammering a statue of Jesus Christ after tearing him down from the cross. This post has gone viral, getting over 11 million views on X. Now, at first, people tried to dismiss this, claiming it was fake, it was propaganda, out of context, AI. But that defense doesn't hold anymore. The IDF, as we're going to see in a minute, has confirmed that this image is real. And there is reportedly video of the soldier carrying this out. And that changes the conversation entirely, because now we're not debating whether something happened. We're asking what this means. Needless to say, this has sparked a broader conversation in America and is happening at a time when, as we've already been seeing over the past few months, support for Israel has dropped to record lows across party lines. Most Americans do not want to be dragged into a war with Iran on behalf of Israel. We don't want our tax dollars funding endless foreign conflicts, and we don't want to see images coming out of Gaza and Lebanon, bombings of civilian areas, including primarily Christian communities, while being told this is all beyond criticism. Some of the areas hit in Lebanon are among the last majority Christian regions in that country, and that should matter to anyone actually paying attention. Now, this image has intensified something deeper that was already brewing online and within the political sphere, which is the question of whether Israel is truly our greatest ally. We hear this all the time from politicians and media figures across both parties, repeating the doctrine of Israel is our greatest ally. You know, people like Ted Cruz, who receive significant political support tied to their pro-Israel stance, push the idea that support for Israel must be unconditional, and that expectation isn't subtle. It's openly reinforced. Within the Republican Party, my own party, there's a very real pressure that you cannot criticize Israel. You can't criticize Netanyahu. You can't criticize the IDF and the military actions. No policy decisions in relation to Israel can be criticized under any circumstance, so much so that if you do criticize Israel, it's not debated. It's actually treated as disloyalty. And that message doesn't just come from commentators. It comes from the very top, from leadership all the way down to local parties. We saw it yesterday with Trump and his statements. And if you've been tracking my candidacy, you know exactly how far the party is willing to go in order to protect the pro-Israel lobby within the political establishment. Because I've had people within my own party literally label me an anti-Semite because I refuse to blindly endorse the actions of the Israeli state. And that's where I draw the line. I'm America first, and that means exactly what it sounds like. Americans come first, and every other nation comes second, no exceptions. That principle shouldn't be controversial, but in today's political climate, it often is, especially when it comes to Israel, where any deviation from full support is met with immediate backlash, labeling, or attempts to shut down the conversation entirely. Now, all that being said, I'm going to get theological for a moment because that matters as well. As a Catholic, I view Israel in a very specific way. According to the Apostle Paul, the Israel of God is not a political state. It is the body of Christ. You see this in Galatians 3:28 through 29, where Paul says that those who belong to Christ are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise, and in Romans 9, where he distinguishes between ethnic Israel and the true children of God. From that perspective, the modern state of Israel is not some untouchable theological entity, as the Zionists would like you to believe. It's a nation state like any other, subject to moral scrutiny and not above criticism. But even putting theology aside, just looking at this as Americans, we have to ask a basic question. What does it say when a soldier from a foreign nation we're told to support unconditionally is filmed tearing down an image of Jesus Christ from the cross and smashing his face with a sledgehammer? What does that represent? Is this just a rogue individual acting out a one-off incident, or is it part of a broader pattern that people have been pointing out for years? Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. There have been increasing reports over time of tensions involving the Israeli state and Christian communities in that region, incidents involving churches, clergy, and pilgrims, some dismissed, some ignored, some even downplayed. Now, in the middle of this escalating regional conflict, this image goes viral. And it can't be just waved away. This is where the cultural critique becomes unavoidable, because in America, we are constantly told that certain things are sacred, that certain identities, symbols, and communities are beyond criticism or disrespect. But Christianity, Christian symbols, the image of Christ himself are often treated very differently, very often mocked, dismissed, and in this case, apparently desecrated without triggering the same level of outrage from the political class that claims to represent Christian values. So now we are forced to confront this contradiction. On one hand, we have American politicians like Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, especially right here on the right, framing Israel as a moral ally, a partner in shared values, even a defender of so-called Judeo-Christian civilization. On the other hand, we're looking at an image of Christ being torn down and destroyed by someone within that Judeo-Christian framework. And the response from leadership is largely silence, deflection, or just justification of these actions. That disconnect is what people are reacting to, and it's why this conversation is only going to get louder, because this is no longer just about foreign policy. It's about credibility. It's about whether American leaders are acting in the interests of their own people, or whether they are locked into a framework where one foreign state is effectively beyond accountability for some reason. It's about whether support is mutual or one-sided, because right now it looks like a one-way street where money flows out, weapons flow out, political cover flows out, but when it comes to respect, especially for the beliefs that shaped this nation, that seems far less clear. And that's why this moment matters, not just because of the image of Christ being desecrated itself, but because of what it exposes. It forces people to ask questions they weren't allowed to ask before, and it forces a reassessment of assumptions that have gone unchallenged for decades. Whether people like it or not, that conversation is not going away. It's only going to get louder, as I said. Now, all that being said, here's some context to the situation. This image was shared by Eunice Tarawi on X. The caption read, "An Israeli soldier smashing the head of a Jesus Christ statue during operations in southern Lebanon." In a follow-up post, he said that a local page from the Christian town of Debel mentioned that the statue belongs to them. The page remarked, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." A direct quote from some of the last words that Jesus said while on the cross. And for any doubters out there, there is a video showing the aftermath of the destruction of the statue. It appears to be in the same location. If it's not, then we're looking at another instance of a statue of Jesus being desecrated in the region, which only raises more questions, not fewer. It should be noted that Israel has been carrying out these bombings in southern Lebanon for the last month, almost as long as the conflict with Iran has lasted. The communities being affected appear to be mostly Christian towns and villages in southern Lebanon, even though the majority of the region is Shiite Muslim. Now, for some context, Lebanon has a long and complex Christian history, and to understand what's happening now, you have to understand the waves of migration and displacement that reshaped the country over decades. Lebanon was once a Christian majority nation, largely due to the strong presence of Maronite Catholics. That balance didn't just change randomly. It shifted through a series of regional conflicts that triggered massive population movements. After the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the Six-Day War, large numbers of Palestinian refugees entered Lebanon. The majority of them were Muslims. Those influxes, combined with internal tensions, helped destabilize the country and were one of the contributing factors that eventually led to the Lebanese Civil War. Now, at the same time, you had the reverse effect happening. As instability increased within Lebanon, many Lebanese Christians began leaving the country in significant numbers, immigrating to Europe, the United States, and Latin America. So you have two forces happening all at once: inward migration from surrounding conflicts caused by Israel, and outward migration of existing Christian populations as a result of this influx of Muslims. Over time, that dual pressure reshaped the demographic balance of Lebanon. That's how Lebanon transitioned from a Christian majority nation into one where Christians now make up roughly 30 to 40% of the population. Those communities are still deeply rooted in Lebanon, but they exist today in a much more fragile and reduced position compared to where they once stood historically. And that context is key to understanding why displacement and regional conflict continue to have these sorts of lasting effects in that region. Now, as far as Israel bombing Lebanon, the United Nations has raised concerns about Israel's military actions, particularly regarding civilian impact, damage to infrastructure, and the risk of escalation. As we've seen, and as we're about to see, Israel has been primarily bombing civilian areas, those including apartment buildings. The United Nations has stated that they are monitoring this situation closely and have expressed alarm over the humanitarian consequences, especially when strikes by Israel occur in or near populated areas. These concerns center around proportionality and the safety of non-combatants, those being just your everyday civilians, which is why the situation is drawing increased international scrutiny. Now, all of this is why people are starting to believe that what's happening in southern Lebanon is beginning to resemble what many are calling Gaza 2.0. When you factor in the so-called yellow line that Israel has drawn, which is an area inside southern Lebanon where Israeli forces have already moved in and are actively asserting control, it raises serious concerns that this isn't just a limited operation. The fear is that this could expand into a broader, more prolonged conflict or occupation, following the same patterns as what the Israelis did in Palestine and leading to the same kind of consequences we've seen play out there. Now, as I mentioned, the IDF has actually confirmed that the images of the IDF soldier destroying the statue of Christ are real. This is what the Israeli Defense Forces said on X, following the completion of an initial examination regarding a photograph published earlier today of an IDF soldier harming a Christian symbol. It was determined that the photograph depicts an IDF soldier operating in southern Lebanon. The IDF views the incident with great severity and emphasizes that the soldier's conduct is wholly inconsistent with the values expected of its troops. The incident is being investigated by the Northern Command and is currently being addressed through the proper chain of command. Appropriate measures will be taken against those involved in accordance with the findings. Furthermore, the IDF is working to assist the community in restoring the statue to its place. The IDF is operating to dismantle the terrorist infrastructure established by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and has no intention of harming civilian infrastructure, including religious buildings or religious symbols. Now, we're going to get into whether the claims the IDF is making here are actually true, because there is evidence that suggests otherwise. But before that, there are a few things in their language that needs to be addressed. First of all, they describe this as a Christian symbol, saying the soldier harmed a Christian symbol, when what we're clearly looking at is a desecration of an image of Christ. That distinction matters. Catholics don't even view this as just a symbol. It's an image of Christ, a remembrance of what he experienced. It's not meant to symbolize something abstract. It's meant to remind you of the suffering, the pain, and the torture that Jesus endured after being handed over by the Jewish members of his own community to the Romans, who were then pressured by his Jewish community to carry out his execution. Now, beyond that, I don't know how much credence I'm going to give to the IDF's investigation. I would want to see what their actual findings are and what kind of punishment is handed down to the people responsible. That's really the only way to measure whether there's any credibility behind what they're saying here. I'd also want to see if they follow through on restoring the statue and making restitution to the town for the destruction that took place. And just as importantly, I want to know the motivation. Why this image specifically? Out of everything else that could have been targeted or destroyed, why that image of Christ? Because when you look at that video, you can clearly see what appears to be another figure, possibly a patriarch or a church leader, positioned behind the image of Christ. That figure is left untouched, but the image of Christ is the one that's destroyed. That sends a very specific message to anybody who's paying attention, whether intentional or not. And then there's the broader claim the IDF makes in that same statement, where they emphasize that their operations are focused on dismantling Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Now, I'm not entirely sure how destroying an image of Christ in what appears to be a Christian town contributes to dismantling Hezbollah. I'm also not sure, as we're about to go through in a few moments, whether strikes on civilian infrastructure and apartment buildings are supposed to achieve any sort of objective like that. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't know, but I'll let you judge for yourself as we go through the evidence. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu also published a statement addressing the situation, saying, as the Jewish state, Israel cherishes and upholds the Jewish values of tolerance and mutual respect between Jews and worshipers of all faiths. All religions flourish in our land, and we view members of all faiths as equals in building our society and region. Yesterday, like the overwhelming majority of Israelis, I was stunned and saddened to learn that an IDF soldier damaged a Catholic religious icon in southern Lebanon. I condemn the act in the strongest terms. Military authorities are conducting a criminal probe of the matter and will take appropriately harsh disciplinary action against the offender. While Christians are being slaughtered in Syria and Lebanon by Muslims, the Christian population in Israel thrives unlike elsewhere in the Middle East. Israel is the only country in the region where the Christian population and standard of living is growing. Israel is the only place in the Middle East that adheres to freedom of worship for all. We express regret for the incident and for any hurt this has caused to believers in Lebanon and around the world. Now, similar to the IDF, Netanyahu makes a political claim in the middle of his statement. He says that Christians are being slaughtered in Syria and Lebanon by Muslims, and that the Christian population in Israel is thriving. As we'll see in a few moments, some of the on-the-ground evidence may suggest a more complicated picture. Obviously, people can have anecdotal experiences that aren't always representative of broader realities, whether positive or negative. That said, it's difficult to reconcile a statement about Christians being slaughtered by Muslims in Lebanon, while at the same time, there are ongoing bombings by the Israeli military force of apartment buildings and civilian areas in that region. Passing the buck when it comes to blame of this sort of, blame shifting doesn't always hold up when on-the-ground evidence shows otherwise, especially when there's video that raises serious questions about what's actually happening on the ground. Now, as always, there are many online rushing to the defense of the Israeli military force and trying to reframe this whole situation into something more amenable or somewhat acceptable, if it ever could be acceptable, to Christians. One of those people is Rabbi Shmuley, who said this about the destruction of the image of Christ in Lebanon.
Hi, everybody. Let me immediately condemn the IDF soldier who was depicted destroying a statue of Jesus in a Lebanese village. Let me just be clear. The Jewish people in general, and the Israeli people in particular, love our Christian brothers and sisters. The greatest proof is my sons are right now risking their lives to protect Christians who live in Israel. I have a son in Lebanon right now, and my children were raised with a father who ran an organization in Oxford that had 500 Jewish students and 4,500 Christian students. My children were raised in a home where 90% of our guests were on Shabbat dinners, Friday nights, were Christians. I am the person who wrote the book, Kosher Jesus, okay? I'm a Jew who loves Jesus, just not the divine Jesus. I love Jesus, who is my Jewish brother, who never knew what Christianity was. He was a Pharisee, and he kept the Shabbat, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that one errant IDF soldier destroys a statue means the following: that not every IDF soldier is perfect, and he's going to be punished. And the Israeli military announced that instantly. Now compare that to what people like Tucker Carlson are trying to get you to believe. Tucker's now saying that Islam reveres Jesus as a prophet, and Tucker is trying to now Islamify Jesus, who was a Jew. Really? Then why is Christianity prohibited in nearly every Muslim neighbor of Israel? Why are IDF soldiers protecting every church at the risk of their own lives? 170 IDF soldiers died over the past year. You know what it's like for people like me and my wife, Debbie, to sit and have to shake when our kids are in Lebanon fighting these Islamist terrorists, not Muslims. Muslims are my brothers, just like Christians are, but Islamists, murderers. So let's go through the facts. A, an IDF soldier destroyed a statue of Jesus. B, that IDF soldier acted in complete violation, not just of Jewish values, but IDF regulations. Number 3, that soldier is going to be severely punished and probably in prison. Number 4, Israel loves our Christian brothers and sisters. Number 5, the IDF risks its life to protect Christians all the time. Number 6, here's 6. Okay. Tucker Carlson is now trying to Islamify Jesus, who was a Jew. My Christian brothers and sisters, this message is for you. We could not show more love and appreciation to all of our Christian brothers, especially the evangelicals who stand with us. God bless you all.
That is one of the most bizarre videos I have ever seen. First off, nobody asked you to run to the defense of the IDF, Rabbi Shmuley. It's bizarre that you are a religious leader and you're running to the defense of a military force to keep Christians in line supporting the Israeli military force. Do you guys understand just how strange that is? How often do you see the Pope running around saying, hey guys, whatever America is doing, bombing the hell out of another country, hey, that's good, guys. Doesn't happen. When conflict breaks out, the Pope calls for peace. That's the role of a true religious leader. So when you see people like Rabbi Shmuley stepping in, not just to condemn the act, which is fine, we all agree that should be condemned, but then pivoting immediately into a broader defense of the Israeli military force and trying to shape how Christians interpret this, it raises serious questions about what's actually going on here. Now, outside of that, sure, we share the baseline sentiment. The soldier should be investigated and punished. The Israel Defense Forces already said as much, but will it actually happen in a meaningful way? We'll have to wait and see. Because beyond that initial condemnation, what you get from him, Rabbi Shmuley, is a very clear rhetorical strategy. It's an appeal to personal credibility. He says, I know Christians, I host Christians, my family is surrounded by Christians, I love Jesus. It's meant to signal relatability, like he's one of us, like he's speaking from inside our community rather than outside of it. But then listen carefully to how Rabbi Shmuley frames Jesus. He says he loves Jesus, but not as divine, just as a Jewish figure, a brother, someone within his own tradition. And this is where things start to get theologically and historically messy, because the form of Judaism that Christ lived in and the form practiced today are not the same. During the time of Jesus, there was the Second Temple. There were sacrifices. There was a completely different religious structure within Judaism that ended with the destruction of the Second Temple, and what remains today is reflected in places like the Western Wall. Modern rabbinic Judaism developed after that collapse. So when people like Rabbi Shmuley constantly invoke Jesus was a Jew as a way to create political or ideological alignment, it oversimplifies something far more complex. Yes, culturally and historically, Jesus was born into that world, but he also challenged the religious authorities of his time. Jesus confronted those Jewish religious authorities. He fulfilled the law of Moses in a way that fundamentally transformed the religious landscape of the time and effectively abolished the form of Judaism that existed prior to his coming. And that's the part that always gets skipped because it's uncomfortable, it's inconvenient. It doesn't fit neatly into the narrative that people like Rabbi Shmuley are trying to push. The same religious leadership that existed at the time rejected Jesus. They condemned Jesus and ultimately handed Jesus over to the Romans. Even Pontius Pilate was hesitant to condemn Jesus, according to the accounts, but was pressured by the Jewish leadership of the time into carrying out Jesus' execution. They famously chose Barabbas over Jesus Christ. So when people like Rabbi Shmuley keep appealing to Jesus' identity purely as a cultural or ethnic argument to keep Christians politically aligned with people like him, Zionists like him, it starts to feel less like theology and more just like political strategy. Now, all of that aside, let's zoom out and talk about the broader claim being made here by Rabbi Shmuley, this idea that there is some natural unified alliance between Jews and Christians in the Middle East, that Israel is uniquely a protector of Christians in the region, and that criticism of Israeli policy somehow undermines that relationship. You hear this not just from Rabbi Shmuley, but from people like Benjamin Netanyahu, as we just saw. But when you actually look at what's happening on the ground, the picture is far more complicated and in many cases directly contradicts this narrative that these folks are pushing. All that said, everything that we're discussing here, including the destruction of the image of Christ, isn't happening in a vacuum. There have been repeated incidents involving Christian communities clergy, and religious sites in the region. In 2024 alone, over 100 hate-related incidents targeting Christians were documented in Israel, including dozens of physical assaults. In 2025, the number reportedly rose significantly, with harassment and attacks increasing by over 60%. Now, many of these incidents actually go unreported. Organizations like the Rossing Center have documented physical attacks involving clergy being hit, pushed, and even pepper sprayed in Israel. And famously, just a few months ago, during Holy Week, a Christian cardinal was prevented from actually entering the Church of Holy Sepulchre and performing a mass. Now, additionally, spitting, which sounds minor until you realize how systemic it is, has been reported as one of the most common forms of harassment, particularly in Jerusalem's Old City, with a large percentage of incidents targeting areas like the Armenian Quarter. There are countless videos of ultra-Orthodox Jews spitting on Christian pilgrims during religious processions. There have been cases of churches and religious properties being vandalized, graves desecrated, and Christian communities facing legal and financial pressure, including threats to church assets. We've also seen violent incidents in surrounding areas. Christian towns in the West Bank, like Tebe, have faced arson attacks, armed incursions, and intimidation by Israeli forces. There have been documented cases of elderly Christians being assaulted in the region, as I mentioned, and as we will look at in just a few moments. In Lebanon, strikes have hit areas where Christian communities live, including damage to churches and deaths of clergy members in affected areas. In Gaza, historic Christian sites, including ancient churches, have been damaged or destroyed during military operations. There's also the question with the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem, where a significant portion of land has been tied up in a controversial development deal, leading to protests and confrontations with private security. Add to that municipal pressure on church finances, which Christian leaders themselves have described as coordinated attempts to weaken their institutions in Israel. And when you step back and look at the long-term impact of all of this, it becomes even more concerning. Surveys indicate that a significant portion of younger Christians in the region are considering leaving altogether, not because everything is thriving for them, but because they don't feel secure about their future in Israel. That is a measurable demographic shift happening in real time. So when you hear broad claims that everything is fine, that Christians are thriving without issue, that Israel is uniquely a safe haven for Christians, you have to weigh that against the documented incidents, the rising tensions in the region, and the growing sense of instability within those communities. That doesn't mean the situation is simple or one-sided, but it does mean that the narrative being presented by people like Benjamin Netanyahu and Rabbi Shmuley is incomplete at best. And that's really the core issue here. It's not just about one soldier or one image of Christ. It's about how events like this are framed, how quickly they're minimized, and how they're used to reinforce a broader political message. When a religious leader like Rabbi Shmuley steps in to shape that message, especially in a way that tries to guide how an entire group of people, namely Christians, should interpret a clear violation of our faith, this deserves scrutiny. Because at the end of the day, people aren't reacting just to the incident, they're reacting to the pattern, the messaging, and the disconnect between what we're being told versus what we're actually seeing. And what we're seeing is absolutely inconsistent with the message they've been putting out. After that photo of the IDF soldier destroying the image of Christ in southern Lebanon went viral, countless videos began resurfacing showing the broader scope of destruction Israel has carried out in areas that include Catholic and other Christian sites across the region. Israel claims that the destruction of Christian imagery is inconsistent with its values, but then you have footage like what we're looking at right now, a church destroyed in Dergaya in southern Lebanon in October 2024. Notably, at least 8 people were killed in this bombing. You also have videos like the one we're looking at here of Palestinian Christian Alice Keshaya documenting how Israeli settlers destroyed the Virgin Mary statue she had on her property. She captioned this video saying, "They hate Christians more than anything else." But this sort of desecration isn't just restricted to Catholic imagery. It is also happening to our worship sites.
Been absolutely desecrated by the Israeli forces. You can see here that there's a bunch of graffiti on the wall, but I think actually that's probably the least offensive thing that we have seen in this church. You can see that the pews have been put together seemingly for soldiers to sleep there. There's also trash across the floor. There's toilet paper, water bottles, condiments, whatever you'd like. But I think one of the most offensive things that we have found in this church is the desecration of religious figurines. So this would have been Jesus. His head is cut off there. Residents tell me that that looks intentional, not part of an explosion or any fighting that may have taken place in this village. You can see here that the rest of the church also seems to have been used by the forces, the Israeli forces, for personal use, pillows, blankets, all in here. And again, just the entire church has been trashed. There's so much soil in it. A lot of it has also been burned. You can see how black these walls are. This kitchen, also belonging to the church, seems to have been used. You can see beans and coffee and whatnot. And this, I think, is again one of the more offensive things that we have found in here. This is the Virgin Mary. Her face seems to have been cut off. You can also see baby Jesus over there, his arm cut off. And actually, the state of this church, it's unique, but the entire town, and this is a very small town, there are only some 8 families living here. All of the town really looks like this. We were speaking to a fellow, so sweet, loves this place so much. He spent 12 years building up his house. His house is now completely gone. I'm going to take you outside just so you can see a little bit of how the village looks like. But I will also tell you that for residents of this village, the most horrifying part isn't even necessarily the state that the village has been left in, but also the fact that the Israelis still remain on that hilltop. That is one of the 5 military positions that the Israelis are remaining in violation of the ceasefire agreement and in what constitutes an ongoing occupation.
If Christians are truly safe in the region, as Benjamin Netanyahu and Rabbi Shmuley claim, then please explain this. If we are truly accepted and respected, if Israel is a country of plurality, religious plurality that respects all faiths, then please explain this. Why is your military force doing this? Why are our places of faith being destroyed in that region by your military force? By the way, imagine if a Christian or a Muslim did the exact same thing to a Holocaust museum in America, defaced it, trashed it, desecrated it. What do you think would happen? That person would be arrested for a hate crime immediately. And yet here we are watching the same kind of desecration play out and being told to accept the framing, accept the explanation, accept that, hey, that was just isolated. That guy, the one guy that took a sledgehammer to Jesus, hey, that guy, he's not all of us. There is clearly a double standard in what we are expected to tolerate versus what we are allowed to do. And that double standard shouldn't exist, point blank, period. Call me whatever you want. I really don't care at this point. What we're looking at is absolutely atrocious. And there should be equal accountability and equal apology for this as well, because this doesn't look like a one-off. It looks like a pattern. And that's really the point. The visuals all really speak for themselves. We have religious imagery deliberately damaged, not in a collateral manner, not incidental. This clearly looks targeted. And that matters because when something sacred is treated like it's disposable, it tells you something about how the community that's being occupied by this military force is viewed by the occupying force. And this is where the broader contradiction comes in. On one hand, you have constant messaging that Israel is a protector of religious freedom, that Christians are safe, that there's mutual respect across faiths. On the other hand, you have repeated incidents of this manner that undermine that claim. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim moral high ground while dismissing or minimizing what people can clearly see with both their eyes. So the real question isn't whether one incident happened. It's whether we're willing to acknowledge the pattern that people are starting to notice. Because once that pattern becomes undeniable, the conversation shifts from defense to accountability. And that's exactly where this should be heading. And once again, if you think this is isolated, this right here, what we're watching is footage from 2024 showing an Israeli soldier filming himself smashing a statue of St. George in Yaroun in southern Lebanon. St. George, who, by the way, represents faith, courage, and the triumph of good over evil, the Christians. And if that wasn't enough, there are also images circulating that appear to show members of the Israel Defense Forces mocking Jesus Christ. This image that we're looking at is from a few months ago. It allegedly shows a monkey placed on a cross with a banana at the base, presented as a way to insult Jesus. There have also been claims that an Israeli children's TV program featured a similar depiction of Jesus as a monkey on the cross in a mocking context. Had enough? Well, here's video showing IDF soldiers actively desecrating a Catholic church in real time.
Oh, the great Mary!
מי מחתן אותנו?
קשו אליו. אני מתנגד! אני מתנגד! שקט! שקט! סולין, אני אוהב אותך! אני אוהב אותך, סולין!
אני מבריך!
Absolutely retarded. That's all I got to say about this. If this is who Israel is sending out to go fight these wars on their behalf, honestly, they're not sending their best. This literally looks like the equivalent of a bunch of high schoolers who just got together and they have guns and happen to walk into an empty Catholic church. And the first thing they do, by the way, after they finish mocking Jesus, is just humping each other on the ground. Really? I mean, way to prove the stereotype that all of the enemies of Christ are gay.
Officials are taking seriously a recent upsurge in spitting and the vandalism of Christian sites.
Christians in Jerusalem's Old City say they've been repeatedly assaulted. So how are Christian leaders responding?
Christian citizens feel attacked in their places of prayer, in their cemeteries and on the streets.
Christians in Jerusalem's Old City say they are often harassed, spit on, and even physically attacked by religious Jewish youth. Recently, Israeli Channel 13 reporter Yossi Eli went undercover as a priest for a day. Dressed in a robe, he walked through the Old City with Franciscan Father Alberto. In the first 5 minutes, he was spat at 5 times by Orthodox Jewish Israelis.
Jewish people wouldn't tolerate these sorts of attacks against them. In other countries, they're very vocal about it, and they shouldn't tolerate it here when their own co-religionists carry out similar attacks against Christians.
Again, don't you dare mention that double standard. You're an anti-Semite if you do. Don't you know what the narrative is? Just shut up and take the abuse. And don't you dare ever say anything critical of the state of Israel. Really? How cucked are we as a nation that we're not even standing up for our own anymore? Really? Come on. Because what are we even looking at? This is very clearly not isolated. This is a pattern. This is systemic. The same folks who demand that other countries protect Jews are spitting on Christians in their own backyard. And we're just supposed to ignore this? Apparently we are, because according to our leaders, one of those being Ambassador Mike Huckabee, blah, 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 Judeo-Christian values.
Greetings from America to these two wonderful friends and allies. And we're in a world where we need all the friends and all the allies that we can possibly have. I'm grateful for the leadership that both of these leaders have brought, not only to bring back the values that are the underpinning of Western civilization and the Judeo-Christian foundation upon which our nations were built, but to stand with moral clarity in a way that most leaders are afraid to do. I stand here today with two world leaders who have the courage, the conviction, and the will. And it's an honor to be able to be with both of you.
Every time I hear a Christian say Judeo-Christian, it's evident to me that something's off. I'm not going to sit here, by the way, and say someone's a fake Christian based on that. That's not my place to judge someone's relationship with God, but it is genuinely bizarre to hear a qualifier added to your own religion for what is clearly a political end goal. It's the equivalent of saying African American. You're just an American, okay? Can we just start saying things for what they are? This isn't about theological clarity or historical precision, by the way, the term Judeo-Christian. This is about having a specific political outcome and using that hyphenated version of your language in order to achieve it. Because when you hear people like Mike Huckabee praising figures like Benjamin Netanyahu and Javier Milei for restoring the Judeo-Christian foundation of Western civilization, you have to ask yourselves, what the hell do you mean, dude? Is that a theological statement? Or is it a political slogan? Because historically, Christianity didn't emerge as some kind of shared hybrid identity. It emerged as a distinct faith, one that redefined and fulfilled what came before it. So when you hear this constant merging of terms, it's not about accuracy, it's clearly about political messaging. And that messaging is tied directly to political and financial incentives. These politicians are receiving massive financial backing, millions upon millions of dollars from lobbying groups and donor networks. Everyone knows about the name AIPAC, but very few people are talking about people like Miriam Adelson or the broader multi-billion-dollar infrastructure that exists to support and prop up Israel's interests within the United States. That influence isn't just political, by the way. It's also media, it's cultural, it's on social media. That's why you see narratives take hold so quickly, why certain criticisms are shut down immediately, why certain conversations are off limit, why you even have memes about people getting $7,000 checks because there is a foreign influence campaign within our country. And look, to be fair, this isn't unique to Israel. There are multiple foreign interests trying to buy influence in America, pushing their own agendas, and we should be aware of all of it. But here's the difference. Israel is the one you're not allowed to criticize without consequences. The moment you do, you get labeled an anti-Semite, you get attacked, you get dismissed as something you're not. And that alone exposes part of the problem because it shows that Israel, as a foreign nation, receives preferential treatment within America, within American culture, within American political discussions. So when you hear Judeo-Christian values being thrown around, understand what you're actually hearing. It's not a theological statement. This is a political tool, a Zionist tool. It's a way to align Christians with a specific foreign policy agenda to create a sense of shared identity that justifies unwavering support for the state of Israel. And once you see that, once you understand the incentive structure behind it, the whole thing starts to make a lot of sense. And look, there are some very real consequences to this coupling between our nation and Israel and the fact that you cannot openly criticize the state of Israel without seeing huge social, financial, political, and in some cases, life-altering consequences. This case comes straight out of Miami.
It's unfortunate because I'm assuming she's a senior and going to graduate soon, and now this is going to jeopardize her ability to graduate.
A 23-year-old FIU student charged with a felony over messages she wrote in a school group chat. Gabriela Saldana facing a judge Thursday morning. According to her arrest report, this went down in a WhatsApp group chat of about 215 students, where students were discussing an event that was to take place Friday at the Ocean Bank Convocation Center on campus to make their capstone presentations. An FIU police officer read some of the statements in court.
The exact words utilized was, "There's going to be a bomb in the Ocean Bank Convocation Center, and it's going to be at Jonathan's fault," one of the members in the chat.
7 News obtaining some bits of that chat. It seemed the student wanted the event rescheduled and wrote, quote, "Netanyahu, if you can hear me, drop some bonbons for us capstone students in Ocean Bank Convention Center." Other students wrote they didn't take that text lightly. She later in the chat wrote, quote, "I wrote a dumb joke that should not have been made."
I can understand your position, Ms. Corey, and you're saying this is a joke, but to an objective person, it's not a joke, and there would be enough for probable cause. I'm not saying it's enough for beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't know what the state's going to be able to prove at trial, but for purposes of this hearing, I believe there is enough for probable cause.
Now, we often discuss the First Amendment here. I'm a free speech absolutist, but we have to recognize what the legal limitations actually are to the First Amendment, to freedom of speech. You can't defame someone with malicious intent, and there are specific standards you have to meet to prove that in court. You also can't make a credible threat of violence, and clearly, this is the standard this judge is working from, treating this as a violent threat and assuming it's credible. But here's where the law actually matters, because not every offensive or poorly worded statement qualifies as a criminal threat. See, under U.S. law, especially after cases like Counterman v. Colorado, the government has to show more than just that someone felt threatened. There has to be a true threat, meaning the speaker either intended to threaten or was at least reckless as to whether their words would be perceived as a real threat of violence. Context matters, folks. Audience matters. Tone matters. And the standard of proof at trial is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is extremely high for a reason. Even at this stage, for probable cause, there still needs to be a reasonable basis to believe this was an actual credible threat, not just a bad joke that someone interpreted the wrong way. So let's actually look at the full context of what was said. The student made a comment in a group chat referencing Netanyahu in a joking, meme-like way, saying essentially, "If you can hear me, Netanyahu, drop something on this place," clearly alluding to Israel's reputation for bombing their neighbors. That format exists all over social media, people exaggerating it for humor, saying they want some authority figure like Netanyahu intervening dramatically in a situation. It's a meme. It's not a literal call to action. Now, beyond that, the student actually acknowledges in that chat that it was a bad joke. She herself says it. It was dumb. It shouldn't have ever been made. Even the judge admits that the prosecution may not be able to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. So then, what are we doing here? Why are we charging a 23-year-old college student with a felony over something said in a private group chat? Why are we even at this stage where her ability to graduate and her entire future is now at risk over something that, by all available context, was not a real credible threat? Because at this point, it starts to look like the judge is reaching, not applying the law in a straightforward way, but stretching it to make a broader point. And that's dangerous. The courtroom is not supposed to be a place for signaling or messaging. It's supposed to be a place where standards are applied consistently based on evidence, not optics. And by the way, this whole case doesn't exist in isolation. There has been a broader push. This is openly discussed by organizations like the ADL to expand what qualifies as unacceptable or punishable speech when it comes to anything involving Israel or Jewish identity in America. We've seen cases in places like Miami where people made comments online to their mayor about Gaza and suddenly get visits from local law enforcement. We've seen similar incidents in Texas. This is part of a pattern, whether people want to admit it or not. So what does this mean for free speech in America? What does this mean for liberty if you effectively create a category of people that you're not allowed to criticize, you're not allowed to joke about, not even reference without risking losing your entire life and even criminal prosecution? Social consequences are a thing. Financial consequences are another. But now we're talking about criminal consequences over a joke in a group chat. So let's be honest about the reality here, because this is a 23-year-old college student. You actually believe she has the power to summon Benjamin Netanyahu to carry out an attack on her school? Obviously, credible attacks should be taken seriously. Nobody is arguing against that. But when the person themselves clarifies it's a bad joke, in what world does a judge decide that the appropriate response is to potentially derail this person's life over something like this? Because let's be real for a second, folks. When you look beneath the surface, this signals to something much bigger. This is about the slow encroachment on free speech. It's about creating a chilling effect where people become afraid to speak, afraid to joke, afraid to engage with certain topics, namely Israel and the war crimes of the Israeli government, because they know the consequences could be disproportionate to their actions and severe. And when that fear sets in, that's when speech stops being free. Now, all that said, let's zoom out and look at the broader context we've been discussing here. You have situations where Christian imagery is desecrated, where churches are damaged, where Christian communities are mistreated, and the expectation is that people stay quiet or continue offering support to those sorts of actions, to the military perpetuating those actions. But the moment anyone steps out of line, even a 23-year-old college student who weighs about 100 pounds soaking wet, making a joke in poor taste, They face real, tangible consequences. Their life is completely destroyed with criminal prosecution. Do you notice the double standard? That's the question that people should be asking. That's the question many people are asking. And once people start asking it, once more people join in on the skepticism and really start thinking, how do we get here? Why is this happening? I think a lot of people are going to come to the truth. And hopefully at that point, this will stop, because this isn't how our country was designed to operate. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Christ is King. Peace.